Los Angeles, 1991, Capitol Studios. Natalie Cole put on the headphones and closed her eyes. Then she heard it, her father's voice, clear, intimate, alive, unforgettable. That's what you are. Nat King Cole had been dead for 26 years. Natalie was 15 when he died, barely old enough to understand what she was losing. Now she was 41, standing in a recording booth, about to sing a duet with a ghost. The technology was new, almost magical. They'd taken her father's original 1961 recording of Unforgettable, isolated his vocal track using digital audio separation techniques that didn't exist when he was alive, and now that voice, preserved in analog tape for 3 decades, was playing through her headphones like he was standing right beside her. Producer David Foster watched through the control room glass as Natalie's face crumpled, tears before she'd sung a single note. "Are you okay?" His voice crackled through the talkback. "We can take a break if you need." "No," Natalie said, wiping her eyes. "No, I'm not okay, but let's do this anyway." What happened in that studio over the next 3 hours would create one of the most emotionally devastating recordings in music history, a daughter singing with her deceased father. A conversation that never happened in life, made possible by technology, grief transformed into art, and a preview of questions we're still wrestling with today. When technology can resurrect the dead, should it? Before we dive into the story of how Unforgettable became the first AI duet before AI existed, and why Natalie Cole initially refused to record it because it felt like disturbing his grave, tell me, if you could have one conversation with someone you've lost, what would you say? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, because this story about technology, grief, and impossible closure is as relevant in 2026 as it was in 1991. Natalie Cole's relationship with her father was complicated in ways most people never knew. Yes, she was Nat King Cole's daughter, fame, privilege, opportunities. But she also grew up with a father who was always working, always touring, always elsewhere. "I spent my childhood waiting for him to come home," Natalie would say years later, and when he did, he was tired or preparing to leave again. Being Nat King Cole left very little energy for being dad. Nat loved his daughter intensely, wrote letters from the road, sent gifts, made time when he could, but his career demanded everything, and Natalie got whatever was left over. Then in 1965, when Natalie was 15, Nat was diagnosed with lung cancer. He'd smoked 3 packs a day for decades. The cancer was aggressive, already advanced. He died February 15, 1965, 45 years old. Natalie was still in high school. "I never got to tell him I understood," Natalie said decades later. "Never got to have an adult conversation about what it meant to be him, to carry that weight. He died before I was old enough." That unfinished business haunted her for 26 years. Natalie tried to escape her father's shadow by becoming someone else entirely. She went to college, studied child psychology, got married, tried to build a life that had nothing to do with music or fame or the weight of being a Cole. It didn't work. Music was in her blood. By her mid-20s, she was performing, recording, building her own career, but always with the complicated reality of being Nat King Cole's daughter, a blessing and a burden, an advantage and an impossible standard. She had success, hit records in the 1970s and 1980s, Grammy nominations, respect as an artist in her own right, but she also struggled with drug addiction, the pressure of comparison, the weight of expectations, the ghost of a father she'd never fully known. By 1991, Natalie was sober, rebuilding her career, trying to figure out who she was as an artist separate from her father's legacy. That's when David Foster called with an idea that terrified her. "I want you to sing Unforgettable with your dad," Foster said. Silence on the line. "Natalie, did you hear me? I heard you, and the answer is no." Foster had expected resistance. "Just hear me out. David, my father has been dead for 26 years. I'm not going to exploit his memory for a novelty record. It's not a novelty. The technology exists now to isolate his vocal track from the original recording. We can make it sound like you're in the same room, like you're actually singing together. That's exactly why it's wrong. It feels like disturbing his grave, like using technology to puppet his voice for something he never agreed to." He recorded Unforgettable. He loved that song. Don't you think he'd want to share it with you? I don't know what he'd want. That's the problem. He's not here to ask. Foster understood. The ethics were complicated. In 1991, this kind of technological resurrection was unprecedented. They weren't just sampling or remixing. They were using digital audio, Separation, cutting-edge technology that could isolate individual instruments and vocals from master recordings, to extract Nat's voice from the original 1961 track and create the illusion of a live duet with someone who'd been dead for over 2 decades. It had never been done before, not like this, not with this level of intimacy and emotional weight. I understand your hesitation, Foster said, but think about it this way: you never got to say goodbye. You never got to have an adult relationship with him. This could be closure, a way to have the conversation you never got to have. Natalie was quiet for a long time. Let me think about it, she finally said. She thought about it for weeks, talked to her mother, Maria Cole, who'd been married to Nat for 14 years before he died, talked to her siblings, talked to therapists and friends and other musicians. Everyone had an opinion. Some thought it was beautiful, others thought it was disturbing. Most couldn't articulate exactly why it felt so emotionally loaded, but everyone felt it. This was crossing some kind of boundary between life and death, past and present, technology and the sacred. Natalie kept coming back to one question: what would this give me? The answer, when she was honest with herself: a chance to sing with her father. To hear his voice responding to hers, to exist in musical conversation with him in a way they'd never done in life, to feel, even if just for 3 minutes, like they were together again. She called Foster back. Okay, let's do it, but if it feels wrong when we start, I'm stopping. I won't force this if it doesn't feel right. Fair enough, Foster agreed. Technology required to make the duet work was complex and, by today's standards, primitive. In 1991, digital audio workstations existed, but were nowhere near as powerful as modern software. Isolating individual vocal tracks from a finished recording, separating Nat's voice from the orchestral arrangement that had been mixed together in 1961, required specialized equipment and techniques that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Engineer Al Schmitt worked for weeks on the isolation. The original 1961 master tapes were pulled from Capitol's archives, fragile, decades-old analog recordings that had to be handled with extreme care. Using digital transfer technology and early spectral editing tools, Schmitt painstakingly separated Nat's vocal performance from the instrumental backing. It wasn't perfect. There was bleed, remnants of the orchestra that couldn't be fully removed without damaging the vocal, but it was clean enough, clear enough, intimate enough to create the illusion. Then came the arrangement. Foster didn't want to simply replay the 1961 backing track. He wanted to create something new, a fresh orchestration that could accommodate both Nat's vintage vocal and Natalie's contemporary performance. Something that would make them sound like they were truly singing together, not just layered on top of each other. The recording session was scheduled for June 1991. Natalie arrived at Capitol Studios, the same building where her father had recorded countless hits over his career, nervous in ways she'd never been before a session. This wasn't stage fright, this was anticipatory grief. She was about to hear her father's voice, isolated, intimate, directed at her in a way it never had been. In life, she was about to try to harmonize with a man who'd been dead for 26 years. She was about to sing the words "Unforgettable, that's what you are" to her father, knowing he couldn't hear her, knowing this was technological artifice pretending to be connection. The studio itself held ghosts. Studio B, where they'd set up for the session, was the same room where Nat had recorded some of his biggest hits. The same walls, the same acoustics. The same wooden floors he'd walked across carrying sheet music and coffee and the weight of being one of the most famous voices in America. Natalie could feel his presence everywhere, not supernatural, just memory. The accumulated weight of knowing her father had stood in this exact space, breathed this exact air, created magic in this exact room. Foster met her in the control room. Equipment was state-of-the-art for 1991, digital mixing boards, early Pro Tools systems, monitors that could play back with clarity that would have astounded engineers from her father's era. "We'll take it slow," Foster said. "No pressure. If you need to stop at any point, we stop." Al Schmitt was there too, the engineer who'd painstakingly isolated Nat's vocal from the 1961 master. He showed Natalie the waveforms on the computer screen, her father's voice rendered as peaks and valleys of digital information. "It's amazing," he said quietly. "The original recording was so clean, his vocal was so present that we could extract almost every nuance, every breath, every subtle inflection." Natalie stared at the screen, her father's voice translated into ones and zeros, a ghost made of data. Natalie nodded, put on the headphones, and stepped into the vocal booth. The instrumental track started. Foster's new arrangement, lush, romantic, carefully crafted to support two voices across 3 decades. Then Nat's voice came in, unforgettable, that's what you are. Natalie gasped. The isolation was so clean, so intimate that it sounded like he was right there. Not a recording from 1961, not a historical artifact, but a living, breathing voice, her father's voice. Warm, controlled, perfect in its phrasing. She was supposed to start singing her verse. She couldn't. She was crying too hard. Foster stopped the track. "Natalie, I'm okay," she managed. It's really him. It sounds like he's alive. Do you want to take a break?" "No, let's try again." They ran it again. This time, Natalie made it through her verse, her voice shaking but controlled. Then came the bridge, where Foster had arranged for their voices to overlap. Natalie singing harmony while her father's voice carried the melody. Hearing their voices together, her contemporary alto blending with his preserved baritone, was overwhelming in ways she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just nostalgic, it was intimate, personal, like having a conversation they'd never had in life, unforgettable in every way. When the take ended, Natalie stood in the booth crying silently, headphones still on. Foster gave her time. No rushing, no pressure, just space to feel what she was feeling. After a few minutes, Natalie's voice came through the talkback. "Can we do it again? I want to try something." They did another take, then another. Natalie experimented with phrasing, with harmony lines, with the moments where her voice and her father's intertwined. She was working, technically, but she was also having the musical conversation with him that she'd never got to have in life. By the fifth take, something shifted. Natalie stopped crying, started smiling. The grief was still there, but it had transmuted into something else. Joy, maybe, or gratitude, or the strange peace that comes from saying goodbye to someone you never got to properly leave. The final version of Unforgettable took 3 hours to record, not because it was technically difficult, because it was emotionally impossible, and Natalie had to work through that impossibility one take at a time. When they finished, she sat in the booth for a long time, not saying anything. Finally, "Thank you. I don't know if that was right or wrong, but I needed it." Unforgettable was released in June 1991 as the title track of Natalie's album. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People who heard it cried, not polite tears, deep, ugly, cathartic crying. There was something about hearing a daughter sing with her dead father, hearing their voices blend across the boundary of death, that tapped into universal grief. Everyone had lost someone. Everyone had unfinished conversations. Everyone wondered what it would be like to have one more chance to speak to someone who was gone. Unforgettable gave them that fantasy made audible, a technological miracle that felt like emotional resurrection. The song topped the charts. Won Grammy Awards, Record of the Year, Song of the Year, Best Traditional Pop Vocal Performance. The album went multi-platinum. 70 million people bought or listened to a recording of a dead man singing with his living daughter. But the success brought uncomfortable questions. Was this honoring Nat King Cole's memory or exploiting it? He never agreed to this duet, never knew it would exist. His voice was being used in ways he couldn't have imagined in 1961. Some critics called it tasteful tribute, others called it necrophilia by technology. Natalie addressed the concerns directly. "I understand why people are uncomfortable. But this wasn't about exploiting my father. This was about finally having the connection with him I never got in life. And if that brings comfort to other people who have lost someone, then maybe the discomfort is worth it." The ethical questions didn't have easy answers in 1991. They still don't in 2026. Today, AI resurrection of dead artists is everywhere. Hologram tour, deep fake performances, voice synthesis creating new songs from deceased musicians. ABBA performs in London as digital avatars. Tupac appeared via hologram at Coachella. Whitney Houston toured posthumously. And every single one of those technological resurrections traces back to 1991, to Unforgettable, to the moment when Natalie Cole proved you could make a dead person's voice sound alive again, intimate again, like they were still here. The technology has improved exponentially. What took weeks of painstaking isolation work in 1991 can be done in minutes with modern AI. What required specialized equipment and expertise is now available as consumer software. But the ethical questions remain the same. Who owns a person's voice after they die? Who gets to decide how it's used? Is technological resurrection honoring the dead or exploiting them? Where's the line between tribute and violation? Natalie Cole wrestled with these questions until her own death in 2015. In interviews over the years, her feelings about Unforgettable evolved. Sometimes she called it the most important thing she'd ever done, the closure she'd needed, the conversation with her father that healed something broken in her. Other times she expressed ambivalence, wondered if she'd crossed a line, questioned whether the commercial success had turned something sacred into something commercial. "I don't regret it," she said in a 2014 interview a year before she died, "but I understand why it makes people uncomfortable. We use technology to make my father's voice do something he never agreed to. Even if I believe he would have wanted it, even if it brought me peace, that doesn't change the fact that we made that choice for him." In her final years, Natalie received requests constantly to record more duets with her father. Producers wanted to mine his catalog, create more posthumous collaborations, capitalize on the success of Unforgettable. She always refused. "We did it once. It meant something because it was singular. If I keep doing it, it stops being about connection and becomes about product. I won't do that to him." Natalie Cole died on December 31, 2015 from heart failure. She was 65. In the weeks after her death, Unforgettable saw a massive surge in streams and downloads. Millions of people returned to the song, hearing it differently now. Not just a daughter singing with her dead father, but a daughter who was now gone too, singing with a father she'd joined. The song had transformed again, from duet to memorial, from technological marvel to double eulogy. Today, if you listen to Unforgettable knowing the full story, it's almost unbearably moving. You hear Natalie's voice trying so hard to be professional, to hit the notes, to harmonize perfectly, and underneath that professionalism you hear the grief, the longing, the attempt to have a conversation across an impossible distance. You hear Nat's voice preserved from 1961, unaware it would someday sing with his daughter, unaware she'd spend her life in his shadow, unaware she'd die of the same heart problems that ran in their family. And you hear the technology trying so hard to make them sound like they're together. The echoing and reverb and careful mixing designed to create the illusion that they're in the same room, the same moment, the same reality. It's all artifice, all carefully constructed illusion. And it's all emotionally true. That's the paradox of Unforgettable. It's fake and real simultaneously. A technological trick that accessed genuine emotion. A posthumous duet that gave Natalie something life never had. The conversation she needed to have with her father about understanding his absence, his choices, his humanity beyond his fame that never happened in life. He died before she was old enough to have it. But singing Unforgettable with his voice, responding to his phrasing, finding harmony with his melody, that was a kind of conversation, different from words, but real. She was telling him through music, "I understand now. I understand why you were gone so much. I understand the weight you carried. I understand that being Nat King Cole left very little room for being Dad, and I forgive you, and I miss you, and I wish we'd had more time." And his voice, preserved from 1961, singing words he'd recorded for completely different reasons, seemed to say back, "Unforgettable, that's what you are. Maybe the ethics are forever unsettled. Maybe technological resurrection of the dead will always be uncomfortable. Maybe we'll never have clear answers about consent and exploitation and honoring versus using. But this much is true. Unforgettable gave Natalie Cole something she desperately needed. And it gave millions of people permission to imagine their own impossible conversations with people they've lost. That's worth something. Maybe it's worth the discomfort of the questions it raises. In 2026, as AI continues to make the dead speak and sing and appear to live again, Unforgettable remains the template. The first time technology made grief into art. The first time daughter sang with her dead father and the whole world cried listening. It won't be the last. The technology only gets better. The resurrections only get more convincing, but it might remain the most moving because it was first, because the emotion was raw, because Natalie's voice, trying so hard to hold it together while singing with her father's ghost, carries a vulnerability that no amount of technological polish can manufacture. 70 million people have listened to Unforgettable. 70 million people have heard what it sounds like when love and grief and technology and music all collide in 3 minutes and 17 seconds. And sometime in those 3 minutes, almost everyone cries, because they're not just hearing Natalie and Nat, they're hearing themselves and whoever they've lost. They're hearing the conversation they never got to have. They're hearing proof that even death doesn't end love, it just changes its form. And sometimes, if the technology exists and the need is great enough, you can reach across that boundary and sing one more song together. Unforgettable, that's what they are.